Meet Ruby Franke. She was one of the most popular family bloggers on YouTube with 2.5 million subscribers. But she's now going to be doing 30 years in prison for what she did to her children. You see, Ruby had a problem. She wanted to be seen as the perfect mom, the ultimate parent. She was also a part of the Mormon church, which means that she wanted people to see her as perfect. And she also craved validation. So she started the 8-passenger YouTube channel, teaching people about parenting and family dynamics. But because of her appetite for validation, it got to a point where it wasn't enough to interact with her. You also had to interact with the camera. And the camera went with her everywhere. Like a lot of other channels, her page started to grow. People started to recognize her. People started to look at her and her husband Kevin as relationship goals. The channel started to make money. And before you know it, she started to look at her kids as employees, with her being the CEO. But eventually, her kids started getting sick of it. Everything revolved around the channel. Her husband Kevin mentioned that the kids were starting to lose their light. And this is where things all started to implode. Because this guy, Ruby's son Chad, had had enough. So when brand deals would come in, Chad would intentionally screw up his lines. But don't forget, Ruby wants the image of perfection. She can't have a rebellious teen as a Mormon mother with 2.5 million followers because it's bad for the image and she can't get the validation she craves. So upon a friend's recommendation enters this woman, Jodi Hildebrandt. She was a well-known therapist in the area, and with her no bullshit approach, she was here to fix Chad. So they set up the first meeting and Jodi said to Chad, "Are you ready to start living an honest, responsible life?" And Chad said back to her, "Yeah, absolutely." Like a lot of other teenagers, he was just telling her what she wanted to hear. And Jodi looked back at him and said, "You're lying." And Chad looks over at Ruby and she starts to get a little bit of a smirk on her face. Jodi tells Ruby that Chad is running circles around you. And the only way to correct it is that they needed to take everything. But when I say everything, I mean everything. No sports, no phone, no bed, no bedroom. He had one of two choices. He could sleep on the couch in the living room or on a beanbag chair in the basement. This goes on for 7 months. And they increased the calls with Jodi from 1 time a week to 2 times a week. Eventually, Chad gets to a point where he's just had enough. And he starts to comply and they give him his bedroom back. And this is where things start to get crazy. In Ruby's mind, not only is what she did to Chad okay, but she also made a video vlog bragging about it. And when people online heard that Chad was sleeping on a beanbag, the excessive punishments that Ruby was taking him through, people online started to question Ruby Franke. People started trolling their comment section. For the first time, they started getting hate, and a lot of that hate was directed towards Ruby. Now keep in mind, up until this point, this family had the image of perfection. But Ruby and Kevin don't see this as anything that they've done wrong. They see this as an attack. Our beautiful family is being attacked. Cancel culture is coming to get us because we're Mormon. So they take down the video, and even though they started losing sponsorships and brand deals, remember, the driving force with Ruby with this channel is validation. So now she starts to put even more pressure on the family for this image of perfection. And when things weren't just right, there would be discipline in the form of whoopings, but those whoopings would result in red stuff coming from the kid's nose. Sherry Franke, the oldest daughter, would sometimes have to clean red stuff off the walls. And now these children have to perform, but out of fear. But even with Ruby trying to convince the kids to fake being happy, since posting this video, even though they took it down, people were still outraged. The engagement started to tank, the views started to slow down, and the Passenger 8 channel was being canceled. And as a result, the content started to change. Even on camera, Ruby started to become more militant. Oh, and you must have thought I forgot about Jodi. In comes Jodi Hildebrandt, who's not only a therapist, but also a business coach, who convinces Ruby to start a group with her called Connexions. And even though Jodi's the lead, she brings Ruby in as a partner. And it exploits people who have this image of sinless, perfect Mormonism. And it starts to prey on weak couples. P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y. And this group loves women, thinks that women can do nothing wrong, and men can't do anything right. Former members of the group say that they not only hate men, but Jodi was intentionally targeting weak couples to try to cause division and separation. Pay attention to that. That's important later. Essentially, these two started a cult. Now keep in mind that Ruby is already a part of the group, but they also bring Kevin in as well. And Jodi elevates these two because of their status on social media. Don't forget, they're local celebrities. Even though they were being canceled, within their community, this was relationship goals. So now them as a couple are shining in this Connexions group, cult. And they put pressure and convince Kevin to join the men's group. But the men's group is very different from the Connexions group. In that group, Jodi spends time shaming and belittling men, running it like a militant addictions group, convincing them that even their desire to have sex with their wives was really a lustful addiction. And over time, Jodi convinces Ruby over to this Connexions group, and they rename it Moms of Truth. Okay, so now fast forward to 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. The world shut down, and these two are running a cult. For context, a lot of people thought it was the end of the world to begin with. But when you're in a cult, that thought process is times 1,000. And for you, not only is it the end of the world, this is also what you've been believing for, and you've been waiting for this day for your deity to come back and redeem everyone. So the Frankies start to emergency prep for the return of Christ. The entire family is excited because they finally get to go to heaven. And in this cult, believe that Jodi was called by God. Then one day, Jodi called Ruby. She was like, Ruby? Yeah? And Jodi said, I'm being haunted by hooded, shadowy figures. Satan is coming to get me. So the Frankies load up all of their children and drive hours over to Jodi's house so that she doesn't get taken by Satan. And while they're at Jodi's house, a bunch of weird things happen. Kevin sees a handprint on a window, and someone hears a noise in the basement. And Kevin says, oh my God, Satan is here. So they call Jodi's bishop to come bless the home and to exorcise demons out of Jodi. They call the bishop so often that he stops coming out. So then Ruby says to Kevin, hey, Kevin, hear me out. Since God's coming back and Jodi's the chosen one, we should let her come stay with us. And Kevin's like, all right, bet. So then Jodi moves in with the Frank, and around the same time frame, Jodi starts acting weird. She starts talking like she's possessed. I own her. Like she legit has a demon. Kevin and Ruby believe that they are called God to help her. So Kevin tries to cast the demons out of her. But every time Kevin tried to cast the demons out of her, Jodi would start growling and convulsing. I own her. So now Kevin looks beta because his prayers aren't working. And Ruby and Jodi ask Kevin to leave the room. So now that Kevin was asked to leave the room and he was no longer casting demons out of Jodi, Ruby would go to check on her by herself. One day, Ruby says to Kevin, Kevin, I think I'm going to start staying in the room with Jodi. During the groups, Jodi starts going crazy on Kevin. She starts belittling him. She starts to convince him that he's addicted to lust and that his marriage is about to end and it's his fault. Simultaneously, Ruby is becoming a lot more harsh to the younger siblings. The oldest daughter, Sherry, who's now away at college, would come back to visit during this time and said that there was a noticeable tension. And one thing I forgot to mention was that when she left for college, they gave her room to Jodi. That's important, so pay attention. So Sherry comes back for a visit. Not only does she notice the tension, she also notices the mistreatment with her younger siblings, and she goes into her room to get something. Keep in mind, this is where Jodi and at this point Ruby is staying too. So she walks in and she notices massage oil and candles and says to herself, they must be going to Pound Town, which becomes important because you're going to start to notice how these two are ride or dies for each other. And as a matter of fact, it wasn't only Ruby who felt like they needed to be loyal to Jodi, but so did this guy, Chad, the oldest son. Keep in mind, he's been in therapy with Jodi this entire time. And everyone who's intertwined in this cult system not only feels like they need to be loyal to Jodi, but they also need to confess their sins to her. So one day, Chad, who's 17 at this point, confesses 2 sins to Jodi. The first one, he made out with a girl. Don't forget about how this cult views men and their lustful thoughts. The second sin that he confessed was that he was watching adult movies on his phone. Now, it's important that you remember the mindset of this cult and how they view this type of behavior. Because Jodi makes Chad tell his mom. Ruby not only gets upset, but has an epiphany. Ruby says to Chad, "All of Jodi's possessions are because of you. Get out." Then she goes to Kevin and says, "Our marriage is in trouble because of you. I'm trying to be the woman that God wants me to be, but you are holding me and Jodi back. So therefore you need to leave. And I don't want you talking to me or any of the children." Then she sent a text to the oldest daughter who's in college and said, "You have been reaching out to your father. You obviously don't want to be a part of this family." Starts doing things like canceling her car insurance, health insurance, and essentially not only cuts her off, but disowns her. So now it's Jodi, Ruby, and the younger four in the house. People on social media started to notice that the demeanor of the younger four siblings started to shift. Neighbors started to notice that they were being left home for long periods of time. People are reporting back to Sherry, so she calls the police to do a wellness check. And even with the neighbors showing up when the police were there, trying to advocate for the kids, the police really didn't do anything. So now Ruby's videos start getting pretty dark. And people start calling CPS, but the problem is that no one actually sees anything. They just have suspicions. But anytime anything like this would happen, Ruby would double down on her type of behavior because she sees this as an attack on her righteousness. 10 months later, Ruby's youngest son, who's staying with Jodi at the time, escapes and walks to a neighbor's house with duct tape on his wrists and ankles, covered in wounds. And he says to the neighbor as politely as he possibly can you do me a favor? Can you please take me to the nearest police station? Here's part of the actual 911 call.
911, the address of your emergency. Okay, and the phone number you're calling from. Tell me exactly what's happened.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and we know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
You can see?
No. Our homes are far enough away. I'm not sure. How did you get out of the house? He says he just left through the porch at the neighbor's house. Her name is Jodi Hildebrandt, and she lives 2 doors up the street. Yeah, out in Cayenne, the houses are far apart, so he walked just under a block to get to our house. He rang my doorbell and asked me to call the police.
Does he seem to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol?
I don't think so, but he's very thirsty and...
Need an ambulance?
I don't think he needs an ambulance. I'll let the cops decide that, but his ankles are taped up and he won't tell us why.
Okay.
He has duct tape around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around them. I think there's a good chance he's been...
He also has...
Oh, and he has been around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
Okay. Let's get the paramedics headed over that way, okay?
Oh, that's a good idea, too.
Paramedics said that he was so emaciated that you were able to see his tendons. He told police that him and his siblings were handcuffed and separated all throughout the house. One quick thing that I forgot to mention that will be important later. This is Jodi's house. It's a massive 4-story mansion in the desert of Utah. So police arrive and they start pounding on the door. Jodi answers and she's already on the phone with her lawyer. But because of the boy who escaped, the police don't need a warrant. They obviously have probable cause. So they rush in and start clearing all the rooms. But when I tell you that they start clearing all the rooms, it takes a very long time for them to get through the house. The house is so big that when the Frankies went to visit, when Jodi took them on a tour, it took them 2 hours. So you can imagine that this is a massive project. Rooms within rooms, rooms within closets, and in the basement they notice a safe. But Jodi refuses to give them the code to the safe. She starts playing dumb. They ask her for the code and she's like, I don't know, I don't ever use it. One officer walks up the stairs, goes into one of the bathrooms, and in the bathroom they find the youngest girl. Her head had been shaved and she was skinny and wasn't talking much out of fear. Meanwhile, Kevin gets a call from Ruby. She says to him, I have some explaining to do. Don't forget that these two have been separated and not talking for close to a year at this point. The two youngest children? Kevin said, yeah. Well, they were kind of sort of demonically possessed. Kevin said, really? How'd you know? And Ruby said, well, they confessed. But that's not all. Our youngest got out and called the police. And I can only imagine the lies he's telling them. You need to go pick up our children from the police station. This is your chance to redeem yourself and save our marriage. And Kevin drives to the police station to go get them. Meanwhile, the police are still at Jodi's house looking for the other two children. They're also still trying to get into this safe. One of the officers says to himself, you know what? I'm going to try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And boom, the safe pops open. And in the safe, they find handcuffs, rope, cayenne pepper, duct tape, and gauze. But still no sign of the other two children. Or Ruby for that matter. So they had a separate crew go to Ruby Franke's home. But nobody was home. Not the kids and not Ruby. Eventually, they find them at one of Ruby's friends' house. And neither one of them were harmed physically. But now, police want Ruby. And out of nowhere, Ruby just pulls into the driveway. But she literally says nothing. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Kevin walks up to the reception desk and says, hi, I'm Kevin Franke. I'm here to pick up my children. Obviously, the police weren't playing this game, so they detained him for questioning. Keep in mind that Kevin has not seen his kids in close to a year at this point. But he's also not compliant. Because keep in mind, Kevin still has the mindset of this cult. And he's still in love with Ruby and trying to win her back. It's the whole reason why he drove hours to get to the police station to begin with. So police try to explain to Kevin the severity of the situation. But Kevin thinks that the police are trying to manipulate him. But after interviewing the two youngest children, police realized that they needed to search Jodi's house again. Don't forget how massive it is. And what they found in this search was absolutely disgusting. In one of the rooms, they found a blue folder on a nightstand where Ruby and Jodi went in detail, day by day and line by line, all the events that they took the children through. Most of it is too graphic for me to share. But what I can say is that when police read it, they could tell that Jodi and Ruby thought that the two youngest children were possessed by demons, and they were taking them through horrific rituals to try to cast them out. Ruby and Jodi pleaded guilty to 4 counts of child abuse and have been sentenced to 30 years in prison.